I'm Neil Dubord, Chief of the Delta Police Department. This week on our show...
He stood up, started walking in circles, and then turned his attention towards my team and walked directly at us. He was walking at us, holding the gun in the air, and I remember I'm staring at him through my sight and just watching him, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Jordan, if he points the gun at us, you're going to have to shoot him. And I'm watching him, and he lowers the gun, and now he's pointing the gun right at us. He's pointing the gun at me and my friends, and I fired. I shot him.
Bend, don't break. This is a Delta Police podcast.
Hear more about how police officers strengthen their resiliency through the power of story.
Today on our show, I have Jordan MacWilliam with us, and Jordan has gone through a significant event over the course of the last several years. There's several significant events over the last several years, and I can't think of anyone better to be able to talk a little bit about resiliency. But let's start off kind of easy. Now, tell me, what was the last time you ate at McDonald's?
It would be probably last year sometime when I was on the road.
What'd you have? I can't see you ever eating at McDonald's.
Oh, well, I'm pretty confident I would have had a McDouble and a milkshake.
Oh, a milkshake. Yeah. What kind?
Chocolate.
Well done.
Yeah.
So when you're reading, what's your favorite book to read?
My favorite book to read? I generally don't read a book more than once, but right now I'm rereading Extreme Ownership.
Very good. Ex-Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
That's right. How would I think that would be very apropos? Jordan, I want to ask you one more question before we get going. And I want to be able to sort of understand where you are now compared to what we're going to talk about here during this podcast. And I'd just like to hear about sort of your current status and how well you're doing.
Like big picture wise?
Big picture wise. Yep. Okay. Just sort of life, family, and work and all those things coming together.
I'm very happily married. My wife works for VPD. I have 2 little girls. And professionally, I'm seconded and I work at the Lower Mainland District Emergency Response Team, where I am on Blue Team and on the Sniper Team.
Great. Well, congratulations for that. But let's go back to, when did you join the Delta Police Department?
I started with Delta as a reserve constable, I was accepted into reserves in 2007. And a little more than a year after I was hired as a regular member, graduated in 2009, and worked patrol until in 2012 when I, part-time, got onto the emergency response team.
And you have some lineage with the Delta Police Department as well.
I'm a 3rd-generation police officer. So my dad worked 36 years for Delta, retiring as an inspector. And my grandfather was a police officer as well. He was with Fredericton City Police, but they called it the Provo Corps back then, but an MP at the Army.
Very, very cool. Now, obviously, when you got onto the MIERT, the Municipal Integrated Emergency Response Team, that was a goal for you.
Yeah, well, quite frankly, from the time I was a teenager, I wanted to be on SWAT. So yes, it was a goal for me, and I was super fortunate to have an opportunity, not only very young in my career, but also, as a young fellow. I was the youngest member of the team in 2012 and had right around 4 years service when I got on.
Now, when you got on, was Aaron Hill is in our studio here, and was Aaron on the team at that point in time?
He sure was.
Great. So say hello, Aaron.
Hello.
That's right.
A great knuckle-dragging breacher.
That's right, exactly.
I've changed. I've grown up.
All right, well, let's hear a little bit about the story. Obviously, we're going to be leading ourselves to the Starlight Casino and that particular file and a little bit of around what happened. So give us a little bit of an overview of that particular day and getting called out to that file at Starlight Casino.
So November 8th, 2012, it was my first day back after 4 days off. I was sitting down at briefing in the morning and I heard a call over the radio asking for on-duty ERT members to respond to New Westminster for reports of shots fired at the casino. So, you have a long experience in policing, Chief, and I'm sure you can appreciate this. I heard shots fired, and I didn't get too excited because we hear a lot of reports of shots fired, especially being beside Surrey. No offense to any listeners from Surrey. But I just went into the kitchen, pulled my eggs out of the microwave because I'd made myself some spinach and eggs, and tuned to New West Channel. And when I started listening to New West Channel, I could hear a patrol officer screaming on the air. And I couldn't make out what she was saying, but I got a sense of urgency, jumped in my car, and while listening to New West, I flew over the Queensboro and got to the casino. Arrived on the roadway. I think it's Boyd is the name of the roadway. Runs south of the casino, and pulled up on scene, ran up to the patrol supervisor, and a constable was with him, and tried to get an understanding of what had happened and what they were dealing with. They told me that there had been a shooting at the rear of the casino. They weren't sure if it was a domestic or a hostage taking, but there was a fellow holding a woman to the west of us, and he had a gun. I looked, and I could see a fellow with a reflective vest on and another person beside him. It was dark. I couldn't make out faces or much detail. But I could see that he had a gun, and he was holding it to his own head. And I just tried to understand what we were dealing with and tried to figure out what actually had happened. I was concerned, obviously, that she was in imminent harm and that we needed to do something right away. But I also didn't know whether this was a domestic, a hostage taking, or a suicidal person. Because what I was told on the air and what I was told when I got there was confusing me based on what I was seeing. So I made sure the rest of the team was en route, and I spoke to the patrol supervisor, and I just talked to him about some contingency plans, and also made a plan to get closer, because I knew that from what I estimated to be 170 meters away, I couldn't do much. So my plan to get closer was I had the patrol officers who were to the south in a ditch across from the suspect and the victim, had them take over verbal commands, try and get his attention away. And then I had the patrol member, the sergeant, and myself, we moved closer, driving this New West vehicle up. And we moved about 100 meters closer, and now I had a pretty good view and still was hesitant. Like, what am I dealing with here? Watching him holding a gun to his chest or his head, holding on to her, and her kind of grabbing at him, obviously having some conversation, but neither of them engaging with us. Shortly after that, a number of other emergency response team members arrived on scene, and we started formulating plans to try and go and get her. And I felt quite relieved because it wasn't all on me now. It was the most difficult decision-making process I've had in my career, because it wasn't a nice, clean, easy to decide what to do situation. It wasn't clear. After some time, with very little response from either the suspect or the victim, not having any success with negotiations. I wasn't trying to do the negotiations. There was a patrol member doing it, and he was doing a really good job, kept trying. Not getting anything out of the suspect. He was successful in getting the victim to start to step away from him. So she took a few steps back, was walking away, still focused on him, but there was some what we call suspect hostage separation. And based on that, the team leader, who wasn't on scene yet, he asked us over the air to go and perform a rescue. So myself and two other guys, we left our positions, ran out. Myself and a New West member, we put our bodies in between her and the suspect, and a third fellow, a Delta member, grabbed her, and we dragged her back. And then I felt a ton of relief because now this was this fit into the box of calls that I was prepared for. Now we've got an open air barricade. We've got a standoff. And the next 4 hours or so, that's exactly what we had. There was a number of attempts to communicate with him. How in depth in the details do you want me to go?
You know what? That obviously, after 4 hours, it leads to a crisis point.
Yes. So we'd obviously, command had been set up. There was rules of engagement. Do you want me to explain any of that?
No, let's go sort of from the point after 4 hours. You had a contained situation. You had a commander on scene. You had a negotiator there. Negotiations at one point were not progressing. You had stalled, I would think, for the most part.
Yeah, well, negotiations had never started. So the negotiators, the only things, so they'd spoken to him on his phone, which he threw away. They spoke to him on a phone we delivered to him with a robot. And the only things that he would say to them were he'd only speak with the victim and he'd be leaving in a body bag. So based on that, and the things we were told from negotiators and the commander, I knew this was a high-risk subject, and I believed, based on what I was seeing, that it was going to end badly, and by him harming himself or harming us.
Yes. At a point in time, I understand the suspect, who still has the gun and still has at least one bullet in it, does something with the gun that makes you fear for others' lives.
Yeah, well, just talking about the gun having one bullet in it, that was a bit of a dramatic moment, because about half an hour before the crucial moments of this, he pulled the magazine out of his pistol, tossed it on the ground, looked up at a sniper team that was watching him, pointed at his gun, held up his finger and mouthed, "I've got one left." And when that happened, I thought to myself, okay, he's working up the courage to shoot himself.
Yes.
He didn't. There was some hesitation, some pausing. And then about half an hour later, he stood up. And at this point, I was with what was designated Alpha Team. And we were about 40 meters to the east of his position. And I was assigned the role of lethal overwatch. So my job was to protect two other guys, one of whom had a Arwin, which is an impact weapon, shoots like rubber bullets, and another who was responsible for deploying a noise flash diversionary device, like a flashbang grenade, which were obviously attempts, less lethal attempts to take him into custody if we had to take action. So my job was assigned to protect them and obviously the team, and to not let him break containment. So after this half-hour point, he stood up, started walking in circles, and then turned his attention towards my team and walked directly at us. He's walking at us, holding the gun in the air, and I remember I'm staring at him through my sight and just watching him, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Jordan, if he points the gun at us, you're gonna have to shoot him. And I'm watching him, and he lowers the gun, and now he's pointing the gun right at us. He's pointing the gun at me and my friends, and I fired. I shot him and keep watching him, and he goes down. And then quite promptly after that, team leader directs us to get into the armored vehicle. Now we're going to go and try and take him into custody. So we drive up beside him, get parallel with him, and then we make our way out of the armored vehicle. He's obviously not responding to anything. We send dog handler with us, sends the police dog with an attempt to drag him back towards us, away from the gun. Doesn't work. Spins him away from the gun, but the dog's line actually slips out of the handler's hands, and he can't drag him back now. So we move up. I actually go straight up, and I remember quite clearly, grab the pistol and move it away from him and just kind of stand there watching. And within seconds, our medics were on him and trying to provide first aid. So they provide first aid to him and move him over to an ambulance, which was on scene quite quickly because we had them staged and waiting, where he was transported to Royal Columbian Hospital. it's jumping ahead a bit, but he died eventually at the hospital.
So really, at this point is what starts a 3-year challenge for you in relation to how that's dealt with and what happens. And it's really a roller coaster ride. Let's begin by sort of what goes through your mind immediately at the shooting, and then moving from that scene to back to headquarters, which is here at Delta Police in Ladner.
At the moment when I fired, everything actually just felt like I was on a training day. Everything felt like I was doing what I'd been taught to do. It didn't feel real until I was sitting away from where he was getting first aid, and I saw him carried in a gurney into the ambulance, and then it felt real. And then you have a flood of emotions and thoughts, and I joined policing because I wanted to do good things, and I think generally we do a pretty good job of hiring good people. I like to think of myself as a good person. Obviously, as a good person, you struggle with the thought of hurting somebody else, especially killing somebody else. So I go through that cycle of emotion and have those thoughts. And then the team leader assigned a couple of guys, friends of mine, to drive me back to Delta. So we go get into one of our trucks and we start driving back, and they're asking me questions like how I'm feeling, like am I okay? Do I want anything? Do I want them to do anything? And they're being really careful because we'd had some instruction before this, because there was a real change in the way police shootings were investigated in this province just in the months prior to this. And one of the big things that had come out is you have to be super careful. You cannot discuss the incident whatsoever with the other officers. So they're trying to be really careful about what they ask, but trying to ask about my well-being, and I'm feeling okay. And one of the guys like, well, do you want me to call your wife? I'm like, no, it's okay, I'll call her. So I call my wife and tell her the team and I have been involved in an incident. You may have seen about it. There's been a shooting. I'm okay. All the other guys are okay. And she's like, okay, I'll see you for dinner tonight. Obviously did not appreciate that I'd been the one to do the shooting that we'd been involved in. So I like to give her a hard time about that.
How many hours late were you for dinner?
Well, she ended up coming to Delta. So while we were on our way back to the North Delta office, the public safety building, when we got a phone call from the patrol inspector at the time directing me to come to headquarters. So I remember I get out of the truck. I can see this like yesterday. I get out of the truck, I walk in the door, I walk upstairs, and I know there's been some renovations since, but there's that long hallway that leads to the boardroom, the west boardroom. And I get up, I'm still wearing all my kit, holding my helmet, and my friend beside me is holding my rifle. And I round the corner, and there is, I think, every white shirt we've ever had lining the hallway.
There was nothing else to do that day, so we were all hanging out.
all with, frankly, what I perceived as a panicky look on their faces. And nobody said anything to me. I just kind of walked down and went into the boardroom and went and sat down. In retrospect, and knowing what I know now, of course, that everything was so new and so different, and this was different for Delta. We've had police shootings in Delta, obviously, but at that time we hadn't had one for at least a couple of years, and nobody really knew what to do or what they were supposed to do. So I sit down and start waiting. A representative from our union comes and sits with me. A fellow from our critical incident stress management team comes and sits with me. Tries to ask me the questions, but of course, he's very cautious. Also can't ask me anything about what's happened, but just trying to assess how I'm doing. So I sat there and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. So what had happened was the Independent Investigations Office, their investigators determined they needed to go to New West headquarters first and interview everybody else before coming to talk to me, so they had context about what had happened. So I have been waiting for hours at this point, like by myself, doing nothing. Well, not by myself, but alone with my thoughts, kind of staring at the wall, waiting. Time is moving quite slowly. And my union rep gets up and says, "This is ridiculous. Like, Jordan needs to be able to leave. Well, he can't go anywhere because the IO hasn't shown up yet. Well, he's going to go have something to eat." Because I never got to eat my eggs and spinach that morning. So he takes me to White Spot in Tawasin, and you're going to notice a theme here. I have a milkshake. I don't remember if I had anything else, but I remember the milkshake. My wife has shown up at this point. She joins us, and my dad as well. And also, we've made a phone call at this point. My union agent had provided me with a phone number, and I called and spoke with a lawyer and got some instruction. It was very simple, like, just you're going to take a couple of days, and then you're going to meet with me, and we're going to talk about what's happened and all this stuff. So, have my milkshake, come back to headquarters, and waited. So, ended up waiting until just before 6 p.m.
So how many hours would that have been?
Well, shooting was at 10:34, so
8 hours.
8 hours later, just before 6 p.m., the couple investigators from the IAO showed up, and so they're in the patrol inspector's office. In the meantime, before they arrived, I should say that I get instructed to come downstairs and to our ident office, which is actually next door here, and Major Crime Inspector at the time tells me, "Okay, we need to photograph you, and I need to seize your equipment." So I get my pictures taken, hand over my gear, my vest, my belt, my gun, all my stuff. And he's like, "Well, I need to seize your uniform as well." And I go, "Okay, well, I don't have a change of clothes." Okay, well, so then I stand there waiting, and they get a patrol officer to drive to the North Delta office, get my clothes from my locker, drive back. I'm still waiting, standing there, gives me my sweats and a t-shirt, and I get changed right there, and hand him my shirt, hand him my pants and my boots, and he seizes it all. And I'm walking out in my sweats and a t-shirt, and I remember having this thought. I'm like, am I going to get my hands bagged? Like, I did not get my hands bagged.
Do you ever have a flood of emotion during that whole 8, 9, 10 hours now? Is there ever a point in time where you think, wow, what's going on here? And you really come to realization with the totality of the incident?
It wasn't then. I kind of just kept going along thinking something's going to happen now, like kind of waiting. And because I have a bit of an entourage with me, like I'm not being left alone. I didn't have that kind of quiet time to have that yet.
Yes.
I did have it. It came later. So, kind of back to where I was going with this, that IO investigators, they show up, they're in the patrol inspector's office, and I'm asked to come on down there. So I come down there, and it's myself and my union representative, and we walk in, and he starts to say, "Okay, this is Constable," and they're like, one of them says, "Stop, wait," and pulls out an audio recorder, clicks, turns it on, starts recording, and my union representative kind of looks at me, looks back at them, and is, "Okay, well, this is Constable MacWilliam's. I understand you have a document to serve him with." Yes, we do. Constable MacWilliam's, and then they start to ask me a couple of questions, and then my union agent says, "No, he's not going to answer any questions right now. Just give him the document and we'll move on." And then they ask me a couple more questions, and then the patrol inspector says, "He's not going to answer any questions right now. Serve him the document so he can go home." Okay, so they give me my document. I sign something and leave. My wife drives me home, get home, and have a couple of rum and cokes.
What time is this now?
Oh, it's into the evening. I can't remember exactly when. 8 p.m. maybe.
Yeah.
Went for a little walk, went home, went to bed, and then I woke up to my doorbell ringing, like about 7:30 in the morning. Yes, I know I should be up at 4 working out, but you can laugh at me later. my doorbell's ringing. Walk downstairs, quickly get dressed, walk downstairs, and open the door, and it's Chief Jones from New West. And yes, he and an inspector from New West, I can't remember his name, but he asked, "Can I come in for a minute?" "Sure, of course, come on in, Chief. Nice to see you." And he said, "Jordan, I know that what happened yesterday was very difficult for you, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of my community. Thank you for what you did." And really appreciated that. Like, he obviously didn't need to do that, but won't forget it. A little bit of kindness goes a long way. Because in the interim, overnight and that evening, I had that quiet moment where you think about the reality of what has happened, and you think about all those kind of emotions I alluded to earlier, and it was difficult. I don't wish on anyone, especially police officers who want to help people, to have to kill somebody. It's a terrible thing to have to do, obviously, but you certainly don't ever feel the same after, and you think about it all the time. So I had that, and it was a real comfort that he made the effort to come and speak with me and thank me.
So now you're into your first day, and obviously there's lots of press, there's lots of, so I'm sure you're watching pieces of this on TV. And tell me how that's impacting you and your wife, and do you have a little one at this point in time?
Not yet. No.
Not yet, okay.
No, not yet. I will.
Yeah.
I will later in the story, but
yes.
So that they tell you when you're involved in a critical incident, and I'm sure you know this, don't watch TV. Don't read social media. Well, I'll tell you, I watched TV and I read social media because you can't help yourself. You're curious. And so watched it, and there was a bunch of coverage, obviously, but it wasn't, there never were a ton of questions about it because it kind of came out what had happened. That not initially, but eventually it would come out that this fellow had come there and he'd told her he was going to kill her, and he'd taken her hostage, and he'd fired a number of rounds, one of which just missed her. And sadly, he made a number of decisions that, and I'll just as an aside, this is one of the things that I think about to make myself feel better about what happened, that he made all the decisions along the way that led to me having to shoot him. I didn't make those decisions. And as difficult it was for me to have to do that, I didn't have any other choice. So there wasn't a ton of press, at least negative press, so it didn't affect me too badly to read the stuff and to watch the stuff that was on the news. But yeah, I certainly did.
So you had how many days off did you have? What happened there?
So the next day I got a phone call from the fellow who was the human resources inspector at the time, and said, "Okay, Jordan, we need you to take some time, and before you come back to work, you're going to go need to see a psychologist and get cleared for return to duties." I said, okay. So I just talked to him briefly about setting that up and asked, is there a department fellow I go see, or do I pick somebody? So we just kind of sorted through that. And then I got off the phone with him, set up the appointment right away to go speak to the psychologist a week later. And then I think it was, I went and saw a psychologist and talked about what had happened, without going into any detail, because again, I'm not allowed to talk about the incident. And as much as, we think of doctors as doctor-patient confidentiality, legally that doesn't exist. And, obviously doctors are as compellable as anyone. The only people who aren't compellable is your significant other, really, or your lawyer. So, I talked about things. He had me fill out some questionnaires, and we talked, and he said, no issues, you're clear to go back to work. So I think it was 2 weeks later, because if I remember right, this was a Friday. The next Friday or so, I went to speak with a psychologist, got cleared to come back to work, and then it was sometime the following week that I came back to work. I should say though, and I'll confess this, so please forgive me. I snuck out to the ERT team training day in the interim.
Little known fact.
Yeah,
Okay,
little
that's
known
good.
fact. Yeah, but I'm actually really glad I did, because when I snuck out to that training day, that is when I got the phone call and found out that the fellow I'd shot had actually died. And I was surrounded by my teammates. And obviously we couldn't talk about the incident, but I felt a lot of comfort being there with the guys who'd experienced what I'd experienced. So yeah, I'm quite glad I snuck out to that training day. But yeah, so I went back to work, and first things first, I came back and I went and had a meeting with the HR inspector and one of the deputy chiefs at the time, and they told me that I'd be coming back to work, but that I was being taken off operations and that I was going to be transferred to our training unit, effective immediately. And that was quite difficult for me to hear. I love my job, loved being an operational police officer. I loved being on ERT. It was very, very difficult to be taken off. It was pretty devastating, actually. To feel separated from my teammates, to feel separated from doing what I love, it made me question, what are they thinking? Why don't they want me to go back to operations? Why can't I go back to work with my team? So I got transferred to the training unit, and in a lot of ways that was a really good thing, because the two fellows who I got to work with in our training units are lifelong friends of mine now, and some of the best men I know. And when I had some real trials and tribulations later, I was very fortunate I got to be working with them.
So tell me, is there anything that the organization could have done, or perhaps prepared you for that information that you wouldn't be going back to operations?
Preparation is an interesting word, because I feel like our organization and the emergency response team that I was a part of did an excellent job in preparing me to be involved in a critical incident. Physically and mentally, I was prepared. I knew what to do. I was mentally prepared for having to make a very difficult decision. I was not prepared in any way for what happened afterwards. I was not prepared to be taken off operations, to be away from my teammates, to feel separated, to feel like I'd done something wrong. It's a good question. Is there anything the organization could have done better? I don't feel like I'm truly qualified to answer that, but I feel like there must be a better way.
So I'm going to fast forward this a little bit. So obviously you are now working in training section. You're on admin duties. You are not operational. There's an investigation. IIO has the investigation. And at one point in time, it seems like the delays are forever. So let's fast forward it. Is it a year? Is it 2 years? How many years is it?
Well, I just maybe a little bit of context. When I was working in our training unit, I was told I was taken off ERT, taken off patrol, but I was also specifically told, Jordan, you're still a police officer, and while you're working in training, if you see something, you do something about it. And so I did feel some comfort in that. Like I was, most of the time working in plain clothes, still armed. Yep. And little things came up while I was working in training where I helped out patrol officers with some files and still felt somewhat engaged. And during this time, there was also a real transition for emergency response team. So the team that I was a part of in Delta was a part of Municipal Integrated Emergency Response Team was disbanded. And we went to, over the next 6 months, a pretty big transition in a couple of phases where we initially contracted with VPD, Emergency Response Team, provide services, and ran our own team in Delta. And then we shut all that down and transitioned to contracting the RCMP to work with the Lower Mainland District Emergency Response Team. So during that kind of 6-month phase, I was really involved with our new standalone team in Delta. I helped teach on the basic course. I was involved with the training days and helped plan some of their operations and things like that. So I was connected initially with some operations and ERT and such, but became disconnected from it. You alluded to delay and wait. There was a very long time of waiting, and 2 years essentially. But what made the waiting so much worse was nothing. Like, I just heard nothing from the IIO. I heard no updates from anyone. And while I could see what was on the news, I couldn't talk to my teammates about what had happened. I didn't get to, like most files, every file I have been a part of as part of an emergency response team, and I've been on a lot of files now, we always have a debrief afterwards. So everybody talks about what happened, we have lessons learned, we try and learn from it and move on. And that is how I was used to dealing with files, and I didn't get that, and I've never had that with this file. I've gotten so much more into detail with it, but I never got a debrief with my teammates. So I have not been able to talk to my teammates about it. I've had no debrief. I haven't been able to look at the file in any way. I haven't been able to read any of the reports, so I have no idea what's going on with it. And what made that difficult was, as strong as I was in my memory of what had happened, as time ticks on, you start to question and you start to wonder because you don't know, and you can't talk to anyone about it. And talking to your lawyer about it doesn't do you much good because they have no information either. And I would call every month or more and say, hey, have you got any update yet? I will call him again, and he would call and get no update. So we have no update, no update, no update, no update. So we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited.
And the only information you were getting at this time would have been anything in the press as well. So you were learning from things from the press. So really, that comes down to sort of the real reason why we're hosting this is that how you deal with that sort of resiliency. And that's even before what happens in 2014. So how do you deal with that long delay? How do you stay positive? How do you maintain sort of this attitude of coming to work and being enthusiastic and engaged and committed and all those things that we know Jordan to be?
Well, it's very kind of you to think of me in that way. Honestly, at that time, in that just under 2-year period between the shooting and what came later, I didn't do a good job of being resilient. I suffered a lot unnecessarily. My wife and I had a daughter, and in retrospect, and there is no one to blame for this but myself, because I did learn later how to do better, but I wasn't a very good husband. I wasn't a very good dad. I drank too much. I was positive when I came to work because the two fellows beside me were, and I just tried to be like them, but I was thinking a lot about what had happened. And I was wondering what was going to happen, and I was waiting, and it was difficult, and I wasn't managing it well.
Is there anything you could have done, knowing this now and knowing what you've learned? What would you have done different?
So many things I would have done differently. As much as you're not allowed to talk about the incident, talking about your feelings is okay, and talking about how I was doing, I wish I had done that better. I'm so lucky to have my wife. She's incredibly supportive and understands me really well. And she was super supportive during this difficult time, but she could have done so much more if she'd known how I was feeling. If she knew I was losing sleep, if I was laying awake at night, not doing a good job of managing my stress.
Medical? Did you have a doctor? Did you have a counselor?
Yes, but didn't tell them.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a family doctor. I went to see him, and I don't remember what I was going in for. He checked my blood pressure, and he said, Jordan, you have borderline high blood pressure, and, well, from knowing me, Chief, I shouldn't have borderline high blood pressure.
The milkshakes, though.
The milkshakes, yeah. That's 2 we've talked about in like a 6-year period at least. So, but he talked to me about like stress and stuff, and I didn't tell him. So yeah, in retrospect, if only I had talked about it, and because I was forced to, I learned to later. And that changed things. And that later, after what we'll talk about next, actually, is when I actually learned how to be resilient.
So I want to talk to 2014, but just before that, I think it's important for us to be able to say that there was an additional stressor in your life at this point in time, and your dad was what?
Well, my dad had a number of health challenges right around this point, where he had some heart issues, where he had to have a procedure to basically reset the electrical current in his heart. And during an examination, they found a growth on his liver, and he had to have surgery for removing it, and that was quite a bit of stress. I think
Doesn't help he was in PSS.
No,
the inspector in charge of professional standards.
No, but also I think the stress of him seeing what I was going through was really hard on him, and I believe 100% that our health is affected by stress. I just talked about the blood pressure thing. I have great blood pressure now, by the way. But I think that the stress of seeing what I was going through over 2 years exacerbated any health issues he had.
Okay. So we're at this point now where you're managing, you have great support at home, but really internally there's a bunch of things happening.
Yeah.
And it's just piling up. The rocks in your backpack are getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and you're continuing to trek along, but of course the path keeps getting longer and longer because there's no end in sight. So what happens in 2014?
So I'll give a little bit of context in kind of where I was. So I was working in our training unit, and there was actually an incident that happened at work that really kind of affected me later. So I'll just talk about that briefly before I got a really bad phone call. But anyways, I'll get back to that in a second. So I was working one day with one of the fellows from our training unit, and we were at the Delta Training House that we run with the fire department, where we run a bunch of our training, and we were repairing the door, and we were listening to the radio, and we heard on the radio that there was Delta Fire was actually following a vehicle that was driving the wrong side of the road, and it was all over the place, curb to curb. And they updated further that they had the license plate, and they gave it, and the vehicle had been taken in a bit of a carjacking, armed robbery thing, and been used in some crime, and they were following southbound on Scott Road, and it turns westbound on Highway 10. And myself and the fellow I'm working with are at 104 on Highway 10. Of course, Johnny on the spot, or Jordan on the spot, pull out, see it. It crosses our bow. It's right ahead of us, and I pull out in behind it. And, my thought is, we'll follow it. We're in a police vehicle with emergency equipment, but it's unmarked, and we're in plain clothes, so we can remain kind of covert. And my thought was, we're just going to follow it and keep an eye on it until patrol officers can get on scene and try and deal with this. So we're following along westbound on Highway 10, and it gets to 99 and Highway 10, and it's now driving on the wrong side of the road, blows through the red light in the oncoming lane, and I'm like, oh, this is getting really bad. It's really dangerous. So I follow it onto the highway. It's now northbound on Highway 99. This is about 2:30 in the afternoon. Traffic's starting to get pretty heavy, and he's all over the road. And this was before the cable medians were on Highway 99, separating the northbound and the southbound lanes. We're waiting for patrol officers to come on scene, but I'm now kind of straddling the middle lanes to keep traffic from getting up beside this guy, because I don't want him to hit anyone. So I'm kind of straddling lanes, and now I see him cross through one of the emergency lanes, and he is now going northbound in the southbound lanes of Highway 99 in heavy traffic. So I have all my emergency equipment on now. I go up, and the duty officer actually gets on the air and says, do everything you can to stop him. I am trying to pull out into the oncoming lanes to ram him off the road, but I can't because there's so much traffic coming at us. And I'm terrified somebody's going to be killed imminently. A really heads-up patrol officer gets a semi-tractor trailer unit to block the southbound lanes of Highway 99, and traffic now thins out to the point where we are able to get up beside him, and highway patrol vehicle and some other patrol vehicles, we all converge, basically surround him. He stops, gives up. We take him into custody. And amazingly, nobody is hurt. So, me and my partner, high fives, we think everything is fantastic. think we've done some great work. Finish our day, I go home. I come back into work the next morning, and I'm told by the HR inspector I need to come down the hall to the deputy's office for a meeting. Oh, okay. So I actually think I'm going to get an attaboy. So I go down the hall into the meeting, and I'm told, Jordan, can't believe you took action yesterday. We can't have you doing things as a police officer until your investigation is finished. So effective immediately, you're being transferred to emergency planning. And you'll be reporting there for the rest of the day today and here on out. And just to add on, I can't believe what you did, and you're a disappointment. You've let me down. You've let the department down. And Chief, I'll tell you, I felt crushed. I was devastated, very upset. Honestly, not super happy about it, but I like to think I'm relatively tough, which I'm not. Had tears rolling down my face. Don't remember the rest of the meeting because I got out and left and went home. And on my way home, I got a phone call from the HR inspector who told me to stay home, just take a week and come. I would talk to him later and they'd organize something for me to do. I don't remember much of the conversation. I was pretty upset. So I go home, and so now I'm off work. And I'm just kind of home with my wife. I'm trying to deal with all the stress of the shooting and the waiting. And now I'm upset and angry about what's happened at work.
These productions never come without a lot of work from everyone involved. A big shout out and thank you to Constable Aaron Hill, Melissa Granum, and Nikki Hewitt for producing and recording. And of course, post-production done by Podfly. Next week on Bend Don't Break, hear the rest of Jordan's story.
And my phone rings. And it's my lawyer. And I'm like, oh, finally, I've got some news. And he says, Jordan, where are you right now? Oh, I'm at home. What are you doing? I'm sitting drinking coffee. I've got some terrible news. There's no other way to tell you this. You're going to be charged with murder, and you need to agree to appear in New Westminster Supreme Court Monday morning, or you're going to be arrested.
For more episodes, you can find us on all major podcasting platforms like iTunes and Google Play. And don't forget to connect with the Delta Police Department on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Once again, thanks for tuning in.